Welcome to the Nightly 5 podcast with Ben O'Shea.
In today's show, an update on that shocking house explosion in Western Sydney. Plus, virtual kidnappings are on the rise in Australia. I'll tell you who's most at risk. And the Fair Work Commission is giving 2 million Aussie workers a pay rise. Will you be one of them? And Mexico looks set to elect its first female president. I'll leave you today with some big Origin news. In our top story today, the house explosion in Western Sydney.
Police have just confirmed a body found in the rubble of an exploded house in Western Sydney is that of missing woman Jasmine May. It follows a day-and-a-half-long search by fire and rescue crews.
The family of the woman found in the rubble of a Western Sydney house that was wiped out by a suspected gas explosion have broken their silence on their loved one's tragic death. Officers from the search and rescue team confirmed they found a body in the rubble of the Whalen house at about 3:20 a.m. this morning, more than 30 hours after the devastating explosion on Saturday afternoon. Jasmine May, a nurse in her 30s, was visiting her mother when the explosion occurred and was trapped in the rubble. The family of the deceased woman issued a statement via New South Wales Police this morning thanking emergency services for their tireless efforts. It's understood police are providing support to the family who had been devastated by the woman's death, as well as to the Mount Druitt community after the explosion, which left 5 other people injured and multiple buildings damaged. Search and rescue officers used heavy machinery, including a crane, to lift large concrete slabs and debris from the site to access the unit. Officers found the woman's body in the kitchen area of what they described as a very confronting scene. New South Wales Housing Minister Rose Jackson confirmed yesterday that her department was investigating reports of a gas smell purportedly raised by residents at the government-owned units within the last 12 months. Ms Jackson said she was deeply concerned about the reports. Following the clearance of the scene, New South Wales Police will also launch an investigation into the cause of the blast, which was reported being felt in residences over 40 kilometres away.
You're listening to the Nightly 5.
Virtual kidnappings were first seen in Australia last year, and police across the country are receiving regular reports of the scams being targeted towards primarily Chinese-speaking Australian-based university students. It usually starts with a scammer impersonating a Chinese military or government official, convincing victims, usually via text or telephone, that they are wanted for a crime back in their homeland. The scammer will then typically demand large amounts of money from the young victims, threatening them with deportation or arrest if they don't comply. If the victim can't or refuses to come up with the money, they're forced to fake a kidnapping so the scammers can demand a ransom from their family for their safe return. In some of the worst cases, students and their families have been scammed out of almost $500,000. For the first time, the disturbing details behind an incident involving a 17-year-old boy who was studying at a Perth university have been revealed. His and his family's terrifying ordeal began on March 8, when the teenager's parents, who were living in China, received a message via WeChat from their son's account. What followed was a series of other messages and videos that show the 17-year-old student with visible injuries and his wrists and ankles bound by rope. The messages also demanded that 215,000 Australian dollars be transferred to a Chinese bank account. Just before the boy's parents were about to transfer money to the scammers, WA police were alerted to the terrible situation by a family friend. That led officers to a hotel room on St George's Terrace where the tied-up teen was found. It was quickly ascertained he was not in a hostage situation and that he had been forced to fake his own abduction as part of a virtual kidnapping scam. If you are a victim of cybercrime, you should report using Report Cyber at cyber.gov.au, and you can find more on this story at thenightly.com.au.
More than 2 million low-income households are set to benefit from a major boost to the national minimum wage.
Good news, folks. The Fair Work Commission is giving some Aussie workers a pay rise. Are you one of them? Here to answer that is business reporter Adrian Lowe. Okay, Adrian, put us out of our misery. Who's getting a pay bump and how much of a pay bump is it going to be?
So, Ben, we're talking about 2.6 million Australians.
Ooh.
So it's a significant cohort of the workforce. The Fair Work Commission made this decision earlier today, and they also think that there'll be a spillover effect into unionised workforces where you have EBAs who are, sort of in line with what they determine each year anyway. What is interesting is the Fair Work Commission is saying the number of people actually on the minimum wage is quite small comparative to the number of people who are affected by this decision, because it also affects what we call modern award wages, which are simply, for those people in sectors like retail and childcare and those sorts of lower paid industries where The Fair Work Commission makes this decision every year. At 3.75% this year, it basically is an increase per hour of less than $1. But realistically, it's about $35 a week on an average 38-hour week. So the minimum wage now is $915.90 a week. That's an increase from $882.80 for last year. The Fair Work Commission's gone through at 3.75%. That's just above the rate of inflation at the moment at 3.6%. There'd been a lot of conjecture between business groups and unions about how much should be put through and what people could afford, what businesses could afford, what the economy could afford. To my mind, reading through all of the noise that's come through today, it seems like the Commission's sort of gone right down the middle. And some people are happy, but not as happy as they would like to be. Businesses are not happy, but not as unhappy as they would be. And economists are pretty ambivalent. So it seems like
maybe they've got it right.
Yeah, I reckon they've probably gone through and got it right.
If you've made no one really happy and no one really angry, you're probably in the right zone. So I'm guessing the union wanted more, businesses wanted less. So what are businesses saying about this 3.75%?
So essentially they're saying that the 3.75% comes also with the extra half percentage point for superannuation that's coming through. So realistically, this is a 4.25% increase for workers. Obviously, that's not quite the case from the Fair Work Commission, but in effect, that's what they're arguing. And they're saying that a lot of small businesses are really feeling the pinch at the moment. Businesses are facing, particularly retailers and those sorts of groups, facing a cost of doing business pressure crunch at the moment. And so they're saying that essentially this will mean that they could be looking at higher prices in some industries. Some small businesses could be looking at higher costs as well. And that might bring into question whether they can continue to go on as they are. Now, the Fair Work Commission had to weigh up all of these factors from the business groups, things like the expectations for the unemployment rate going forward, expectations for wages going forward. So they've sort of kind of gone, well, the expectation is that this is going to be okay. There's also going to be stage 3 tax cuts coming in next month. There's the extra bit of super that's coming in, and that inflation at 3.6% and this pay bump at 3.75 keeps wages sort of just above inflation, and inflation is forecast to fall on Treasury forecasts by the end of this year quite substantially.
Yeah, well, let's hope that does happen. And then this little bump will look even sweeter and just help those struggling families just keep their head above water with the weekly grocery bills and putting petrol in the car. Adrian Lowe, business reporter, thank you very much for sharing your insights on the Nightly Five.
Anytime.
Mexico's two leading presidential candidates have almost nothing in common, except for their gender. 61-year-old Claudia Sheinbaum vows to continue in the footsteps of Mexico's current populist president. Xochitl Gálvez is also 61, but grew up in poverty. The former senator is noteworthy for being a self-made businesswoman with strong indigenous roots.
Polls closed on Sunday in a national vote that will likely give Mexico its first female president. But the heat, violence and polarisation continued almost right through Election Day. Nationwide, the voting was largely peaceful, but it appeared that even if the frontrunner, former Mexico City Mayor Claudia Sheinbaum, wins, she's unlikely to enjoy the kind of unquestioning devotion that outgoing President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has enjoyed. Both belong to the ruling Morena Party. Nearly 100 million people are registered to vote in the race to replace the outgoing López Obrador. Voters were also electing governors in 9 of the country's 32 states and choosing candidates for both houses of Congress, thousands of mayorships and other local posts. It's the biggest election Mexico has ever seen. Both major presidential candidates are women, and either would be Mexico's first female president. Ms. Sheinbaum, who leads in the race, has promised to continue all of Mr. López Obrador's policies, including a universal pension for the elderly and a program that pays youths to do apprenticeships. Just as the upcoming November rematch in the US between Joe Biden and Donald Trump has underscored deep divisions in the US, Sunday's election has revealed how severely polarised public opinion is in Mexico over the direction of the country, including its security strategy and how to grow the economy.
How does it feel to be back in the Sky Blue
Yeah,
colours?
it feels great. It was a bit of a wild 24 hours. Madge called me yesterday after captain's run and said there could be a chance, so I just had to wait till this morning, and I was either going to bed playing a game today or coming into camp. So yeah, it was a bit crazy, but I'm just it's obviously a huge honour, privilege to be back. New South Wales camp, obviously I'm disappointed for Dill and how it's happened, but yeah, it's a good opportunity for me.
That's James Tedesco speaking after being rushed into the Blues camp ahead of Origin Game 1 on Wednesday. I'm joined now by nightly sports editor Ben McClellan. Ben, Dylan Edwards was pretty much just anointed as the Blues fullback, and it looks like you went and put the mocker on him last week.
I don't think I put the mocker on him, mate. I think yet again he had injury has wreaked havoc with a professional sports player, which is quite a common theme.
Yes.
So I don't know whether the physios need to get together and sort of figure out what's going on. Maybe they shouldn't train. They should just pick them for Origin. They should go have beers with Spud, and then they should just go and play.
And so what has he got?
So,
He's got a bit of a quad situation?
Yeah. So he pulled up a bit lame, as we like to say in the industry, on Saturday afternoon. And obviously the injury was pretty serious with the medical staff of New South Wales, ruling him out of the game on Wednesday. As we all know, they SOS call, which would have been pretty interesting from Madge Maguire, the coach, to James Tedesco, who he'd axed, asking him to be rushed back into the team.
Awkward.
And obviously there's issues around Nico Hines and his calf. He only just sort of got cleared to play last week. So it's an unbelievably interesting dynamic. We've got the axed fullback, New South Wales, an Australian skipper brought into the team. He won't captain New South Wales. That's still going to be Jake Travojevic. So it's going to be very interesting out there on Wednesday night. James has been unbelievably humble about it. Doesn't say he's got a point to prove, just wants to do best for the team. But if he comes in, has a blinder of a game, and New South Wales win, then what do they do for game 2? Does that mean he's back in and Edwards isn't? So it's just it's just fascinating.
If they win, it'd be very hard, and he plays well. It'd be very hard to bring Edwards back, and it's heartbreaking for Edwards. He's always a bridesmaid, never a bride when it comes to Origin, despite so much success that we spoke about last week at the club level. You mentioned Spud Carroll. He's got another column coming through on the Nightly today. What's Spud got to say this week?
Well, Spud wears his heart on his sleeve.
His blue sleeve.
Passionately. Yeah, his bloodied sleeve of his own blood. And so, he's written very passionately about this age-old myth of Queenslanders having more passion than New South Wales. He says it's a bunch of 4X. And he's written about how what Michael Maguire, the New South Wales coach, has done this year, differently from other years and other New South Wales coaches, he's really brought in the old guard of New South Wales legends to connect with the team. So Spud was one of those. They went to a sort of a function last week where they showed the scenes from the very famous 1985 New South Wales series win. So it was the first series that New South Wales had won after Origin started in 1980. Obviously, Queensland dominated it very early on and then, dominated it of late. And he said it sort of brought a tear to his eye, and it really showed that, passion is not something Queensland have a monopoly on, and the Blues are just as passionate. I mean, obviously, we change our players every game, so that doesn't help. But, he's written quite a good column, and he's spoken about one of the debutants, the 6 debutants, or 5 now that Edwards is out, Spencer Lenu, who's obviously had a massive cloud hanging over him from the racism saga during the Vegas game earlier in the year. He's been picked as an enforcer for the Blues, and Spud has revealed what he's told Spencer about what he needs to do to dust up those Maroons.
Well, don't miss that one, unless you're a Queenslander, in which case, just give it a miss. But no, you should read.
Give them hell.
You should
I
read
think
it.
you just said
anyway.
give them hell.
Read it anyway.
Yes.
And so you have someone to hate. And now let's talk AFL, and the golden child Harley Reid is in hot water after a pretty ugly tackle on the weekend.
Yeah. So Harley was being tagged pretty heavily by St Kilda. He sort of took out his frustrations with what they call a sling tackle, where he basically slung Darcy Wilson to the ground, and Darcy, sort of collided with the earth at great speed. So he got handed a 2-match ban. We've just learned today that West Coast plan on challenging the ban. They don't, they realise they won't have grounds to overturn the ban itself, but they are asking for the ban to be downgraded. So they want it downgraded to 1 match. I mean, either way, it means Harley Reid's ineligible for the Rising Star Award, which is the Rookie of the Year. This came after Sam Darcy, who was sort of He was challenging for this award at this stage of the season, who plays for the Bulldogs. He's accepted a 2-match ban for a pretty ugly bump on Collingwood's Braden Maynard. So we've had Georgie Parker writing in the Nightly today about whether the league needs to look at, tweaking the eligibility for these awards, so that if you are suspended, you're not automatically wiped out, which is the standing rule for the Rising Star and the Brownlow. There's obviously been a lot of conjecture about that, particularly around the Brownlow. But yeah, she's written quite a good piece saying, given that a lot of things that didn't used to get cited now do, and players are really doing their best to avoid ugly hits on their opponents, even though the series of bans we've had lately may not indicate that maybe the league should look at tweaking the rules. So if maybe if you're only suspended for 1 or 2 games as opposed to like 6 or 7 for some really ugly hit, then you might still be eligible to win one of these awards.
Yeah, I think it's not a bad argument at all. And I think, like you're missing a couple of games, that's punishment as well. And if you still get enough points that you win it, maybe you deserve it. With the caveat being that if you do something particularly egregious, then there's no coming back from that. Certainly food for thought. Nightly sports editor Ben McClellan, thanks as always for joining us on the show. And that, folks, is today's show. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join me tomorrow on the Nightly 5.
The Nightly 5 podcast is brought to you by 7 West Media. For all these stories and more, head to thenightly.com.au, helping you get in front of tomorrow.